Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us on your Friday evening or afternoon or morning or depending on where in the world you are. My name is Shannon Lee. I am an instructor for the Writers Center. And I think most people know me from my writing at the Lily at the Washington Post. And I'm also a mentor editor for the Op-Ed Project. And I really am excited for our guest tonight. I feel like it's, been a little while in the making. I've been aware of her since her first book came out. So tonight we have award-winning author of The Sisters Are All Right, Changing the Broken Narrative of Black Women in America, which is her book that came out in 2015. Tamara Winfrey Harris has a new book that's out, which we're going to be discussing tonight, called Black Girl: Letters from Your Sisters on Stepping into Your Power. And you may have also seen her writing in the New York Times, the Atlantic, the LA Times, Cosmo, and more. She's also the co-founder of Centering Sisters LLC, an organization that serves Black women, girls, and femmes. So welcome, Tamara.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm excited you're here. I kind of want to know, because I remember seeing your call for letters. So kind of explain to everyone who's not familiar with the project and tell us how the Letters to Girls project came about.
Mhm. So I was doing an intergenerational workshop with two friends of mine for Black women and Black girls. And I just got an idea that maybe it would be great if the 12 girls who were participating walked away with a letter from a Black woman. Because I think um, there's the whole event was about how we can be better allies to each other as women, girls. And there is something about writing a letter that takes so much more care and thought than we really give to conversation these days, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've got to pick your paper and you have to sit down and really be thoughtful. You can't just type K,
Right.
and press a button. And so I offhandedly went to Facebook and just asked, I need 12 letters. Will someone write them, for me? And boy, did women show up. I got more than 50 letters from
Mm-hmm.
around the world. And when I started reading them, I realized that, this needed to be more than a moment, it needed to be a movement. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I started trying to just take letters and get them to girls and girls groups. But, really, as I read some of these letters and some that are in the book now, they needed to be seen by more than one girl. They needed to be seen by many. And so, I realized this needed to be my next book.
Mm-hmm. What surprised you more in terms of the outpouring and the response when you requested letters? Did you expect them to be so maybe intimate? Intimate would probably be a good word.
That's the thing. That was what surprised me, is how vulnerable women were willing to be, because it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard for me. That's one of the reasons I write nonfiction. I have
Mm-hmm.
friends that write amazing personal essays. I'm not good at that. But these women were willing to open their hearts and, in some cases, talk about their insecurities and some really difficult things that happen to them that very often
Mm-hmm.
are in our society come with a lot of shame, and they were willing to talk about them openly and have it published, which I think is amazing.
Right. So you kind of started off with this premise of this is a project. And then, so what is the process of then going, okay, this is not just for the girls that I'm working with. This is going to be a book. So can we include your letter?
So there were a few things. I started. Luckily, I have a great relationship with Barrett Kohler Publishers, who published my first book.
Mm-hmm.
And I had shared the idea with them, with my editor, over dinner, and they thought it was wonderful. So my first step was putting together a book proposal.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to kind of figure out how the book was going to be structured. And I knew that I didn't just want it to be a book of advice and inspiration. There's so many just general inspiration books on the
Mm-hmm.
shelves. I wanted it to speak to some to important issues in girls' lives. It was important to me that girls see, as many girls as possible see themselves in the book in all the ways that girls show up in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So it was important to me that we hear from trans women, we hear from
Mm-hmm.
queer women, we hear from, women who grew up poor, women who are middle class, executives. It was important to me that we heard from biracial women. And so I ended up taking some of the best letters that I had received through the first call, but then
Mm-hmm.
proactively reaching out to make sure that I had engaged women to talk about things that in particular we know affect Black girls sometimes disproportionately, like for
Mm-hmm.
instance, sexual assault. 60% of Black girls will experience sexual assault before they're 18. So for me to
Mm-hmm.
leave that out, which a lot of people do, is to erase part of their experience. So that was a really intentional thing that I did in the structure of the book.
What did you find different between kind of the climate around when you were getting really prepared to release your first book, which is already this book challenging, stereotypes about Black women in America? And so take us through kind of what was happening at that time, and if you think there's any differences in kind of what's going on now that really made it, a really good time to release your second book.
It's funny you asked that because a
Mm-hmm.
lot has happened since the Sisters came out. Sisters Are All Right came out in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And so much has happened for women and Black women specifically in those 6 years,
Right.
which is why the second expanded edition of The Sisters Are All Right is coming out this fall. Because I
Okay.
went out to
Yay.
interview more women, and
Mm-hmm.
especially I wanted to make sure that I talked about um, all of the strides that Black women are making in community activism and politics, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the one thing that was different is even as I was going back and rewriting the manuscript for the first book, there are so many things that people said about women and Black women in particular in sort of
Mm-hmm.
the early aughts that I don't even think you could get away with now. People are much quicker to, call it cancel culture if you want, but people know that, they need to think about their bigotry before they open their mouth because there
Mm-hmm.
will be a reaction.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the girls that may be reading this book may not have seen some of the flagrant negative bias against Black women that many of us who are older have seen, but they
Mm-hmm.
still deal with it. So I had to figure out a way to talk to them about sexism and racism that they experience without
Mm-hmm.
doing it through the lens of a Gen Xer that they wouldn't understand.
Yeah. Which is something I feel like, and we're going to get, more in depth into the book in a moment, but which is something I felt like you did well
Thank
with
you.
this book. So you're talking about this expanded version of your first book that's coming out. Um, which is really interesting because you do write about pop culture and current events. And so it seems like it would be hard to have this book that's pointed to this moment in time. So was this something that you kind of always knew that you wanted to do, or you just thought, okay, this is kind of an artful way that I can do that and encompass everything that's going on? Or is this something that your publisher came to you with?
Yes and yes. It is
Mm-hmm.
something that my publisher came to me with, but I
Mm-hmm.
realized, that the book was probably going to need an update because I think pop culture is really powerful as
Mm-hmm.
an example in books, especially when you're talking about feminism and racism, because sometimes it's an easy way to give people an in to discussing a topic.
Right.
But as you said, pop culture changes quickly, unless you use Beyonce as an example, because Beyonce is eternal. So I
Mm-hmm.
tried to do that, but but I knew that it
You
was
wouldn't be
going.
a fan, would you? No.
I knew it was going to need to be updated. And the other thing too is
Mm-hmm.
age. So I
Mhm.
realized a lot of the women that I interviewed for the first book were 30s, 40s, maybe some early 50s. But
Mhm.
for some topics that I tackled, like sex, if you when
Mhm.
immediately after the book came out, I talked to a 24-year-old about some of those topics, and their experience was wildly different from women who were like 20 years older. So I
Mhm.
want to continue to update and go back and cover those things. I think the foundational themes don't change, but I still
Right.
need to be able to explain it in a way that's relevant
Mhm.
currently.
So, and kind of, we'll kind of get a little bit more into your new book. And like I said, I felt like, there were really intentional ways where you, first of all, you're making it very, very clear that, like, it was a long time ago, but we remember these experiences, and they're a lot like what you're going through today. So, with your new book, Black Girl Letters from Your Sisters on Stepping into Your Power, which is really a great title for the book,
Thank you.
that's a really good descriptor. And I love this kind of description of it as being a balm for the wounds of anti-Black girlness, because that is kind of how I feel like it is. But you have these passages in the book where you are talking about, um, just all of these powerful themes that it's just like, gosh, yeah, like these are timeless. These issues are timeless. You're talking about obviously sexual violence. You're talking about the mother wound. You're talking about these microaggressions and giving real stats in the book. When we're talking about these stats that come out from studies that are saying, that Black girls are treated differently from as early as the age of 5, and considered more adult, more mature, and all of these prejudices that they're experiencing, from school on up. And so, kind of tell me about that whole process. And do you find that you had to do any real coaxing when you received these letters, or if it was just like, okay, this was my vision, and like they get it?
I was surprised how little coaxing and actually how little editing I had to do. This was the
Mm-hmm.
first time I had ever compiled something that wasn't full of all my writing. And that's a little scary because I didn't know how some of those letters were going to come back.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in the case of the women that I proactively reached out to, there were women that I knew that could talk eloquently about different subjects, but I didn't know what they would say when I asked them to write about themselves, or whether they would feel comfortable, or whether it would be deep enough.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the fact that all of the women got it, um, reflects kind of a desire that's maybe universal. I mean, all of us still have our little girl selves inside of us. And when you
Mm-hmm.
ask us what she needs to hear or what she needed to hear, we kind
Mm-hmm.
of know instinctively what that is and can write it.
Mm-hmm. Now, the book is titled Dear Girls, but when you get into reading the book, like I'm reading the book going, there's a lot of adults that need this book. So, so who is the audience? What was your vision when you were thinking about this book in terms of age range and how far it could actually go?
So, the sweet spot for my book, I think, is Black girls age 15 to 21.
Okay.
Um, and I center Black girls and Black women in my writing, because we are so rarely centered in writing, and I think that's important.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that there are some things about our life experience that are universal, in the same way that we are always asked, in the classic literary canon, often to look
Mm-hmm.
at what white men write and extrapolate that to relate to our lives. So
Right.
I think, Dear Black Girl, it's written for Black women and Black girls, but I think any woman or any girl can pull things from it. There are themes like feeling insecure about your looks, not how to figuring out how to, be a good friend, how to be
Mm-hmm.
a daughter, or daughtering, as the writer calls it, an
Mm-hmm.
active thing that I think that all women can draw from, and men too.
Mm-hmm. Now I'm going to read a passage from the intro.
Mm.
Um, So I'm gonna kind of give the audience an idea of how it starts out, and we'll have a discussion about that. Hundreds of years ago, Europeans colonized America using the forced free labor of enslaved African people. You go on to talk about how our foremothers were, um, used for sex, were bred, how their children were sold. So this isn't it started off as a feel good, a feel good book. Like you get right to the point. You're talking about all the ways in which Black girls and women are exploited and violated, unprotected. And so you really, what I like about the book is that you're not talking down, you're not talking down to girls. You're like, this is the reality.
Well, there is the preface. I don't jump right into slavery. there is a little buildup there. But I felt like so many issues that Black girls face are very much related to kind of the core stereotypes about Black women. And most of those core stereotypes came from antebellum America. And so I thought laying that out and explaining in an age appropriate way why those stereotypes exist can also do some work in letting girls know why you face these unfair things. So as an example, I talk about the Jezebel myth that says that Black women and girls are hypersexual, which, has its origins in slave culture. But we also know that when Black women and girls report rapes today, they are less likely to be believed, research shows. I've shared the high stats of sexual harassment. Young girls often talk about being sexualized, even when they're very young, when their bodies start to change. And so, very often, they're gaslighted and said, I don't know what you're talking about. So they need to know where these things that they're experiencing come from, and they're unfair. And then they get to hear from women who have experienced that too, talk about how they overcame it.
Right. How important it was for you when you talk about you had to conceptualize, okay, how am I going to format this book? And I don't want it to be like some of the other books that are already on the market. You have these sections of the book that are breaking down terms as you go along, right? So I feel like even your writing and the writing from the authors of the letters are talking in a really straightforward way, but then you go back and you can kind of, for anybody that doesn't understand some of the language, they can go back and they can kind of, have that information as well.
The thing I thought set it apart from other books on the market is that I explicitly asked for women to write letters that were not just vulnerable and with love, but also that they be progressive, feminist, anti-racist, anti-respectability politics, body positive, LGBTQ positive, all of not making assumptions about class and religion. And you don't get that from a lot of kids' books that I see a lot of girls' advice books that are like, don't pay too much attention to boys, but I wanted to be explicitly a feminist, anti-racist, and progressive book.
The book, I want to ask you, just of the letters that you received, was there a particular letter or a few letters that really you felt like, oh, this really speaks to my experience as a girl?
There wasn't one particular letter, but there were bits of all of them, which I think speaks to the universality of some experiences. There was one written by Rochelle Riley, who she's an author and writer. And she actually writes about being raised by her grandparents. Now, I wasn't raised by my grandparents. I was raised by my parents, but she talks about how lovingly her grandfather provided for her.
That was one of my favorites.
I know.
That made me cry.
The tear going.
That made me cry.
How she got this internship in college but the
Mhm.
internship was too far away from campus and she didn't have a
Mhm.
car. And she's like, well, I'm never going to be a journalist, and it's never,
Mhm.
nothing's ever going to happen. And her grandfather, this very gruff man, calls her out of the house and says, whose car is that down by the street? And he's gotten her this,
Mhm.
old car that's going to get her back and forth to her internship. And, it helps her finally come to terms with the fact that, her family, even though it's not a traditional one, is important and loving.
Mhm.
And like hearing that, like that reminded me of something my dad would do. So it's not the same
Mhm.
experience, but
Mhm.
it is a similar experience. There is a woman who writes about growing up as a dark-skinned woman. I'm not necessarily a dark-skinned woman, but I
Mhm.
certainly remember being insecure about my looks when I was a teenager. So there's so many great conversations where pieces of them really struck a chord for me.
I really love the range because I do feel like there were some that were just really straightforward, like, listen, this was my experience in the workplace,
Hmm.
or this is how I learned how to approach friendships. And then you
Hmm.
have, like these, tear jerkers like that essay where it's like, for me, I was always close to my maternal grandparents. So I'm like, oh, grandpa.
Or the one like, now that I've been locked in my house and I've gained so many COVID pounds, the letter
What
from
is that? They don't count.
Erica Nicole Kendall, where she talks about, you love
Mhm.
your body for what your body can do, whatever it is it can do. And if
Mhm.
you try to do something and you try to climb I don't know, a wall, and you can only get a fourth of the way up and you break down in tears, be
Mhm.
happy for whatever that is, and embrace that. Like sometimes you just need that message. Like,
Right. Do you feel like this would have been a book that was possible, just even in just the languages? I feel like we now have the language that we didn't have before. Do you feel like this could have been possible before Me Too?
mm, I don't know. I mean, I
Mhm.
think the Me Too movement certainly gave women permission to be open about all of our experiences. And I actually think, I was very honored that Tarana Burke gave an endorsement to the book.
Mhm.
But several times as I've talked about the book, I think about the story that she tells about the origins of the term Me Too, and how
Right.
there was a 13-year-old that was telling her about her sexual abuse. And later, Tarana says she thought, I don't know why I didn't tell her Me Too, because I had
Mhm.
that experience and I didn't share that with her. We,
Right.
I think, as women, don't tell girls Me Too nearly enough about a lot of things, not just about assault, a lot of things. And I think
Mhm.
that's what the book is, a lesson and an opportunity for women to say Me Too to kind of all of the things that girls experience.
Mhm. I love that we now have the language because I think if you talk to any, psychiatrists, sociologists, they always talk about how important it is for girls to have the language to describe and especially to communicate to their parents that grew up in a certain era. They can't really relate to what's going on now. We weren't under the microscope. We didn't have Twitter and social media and all these things where people can really document all of our mistakes and
Hmm.
blast them on social media. We weren't able to be trolled and really just harassed in the way that children are able to be harassed these days, and then have to figure out how to deal with it, you
Yeah,
know?
it's totally like we've experienced some similar things, but I can't imagine being a teenager in the internet and social media age. It's a whole different
Mhm.
ball game, which is why I hope this book will be um, also a tool for caregivers of girls to listen and to
Mhm.
start conversations. I created a reader experience kit, which is something new for me. It's
Okay.
available on my website, TamaraWinfreyHarris.com,
Mhm.
free for download, that has questions. So if mothers or aunts or whoever want to have deeper conversations about each chapter, with a young woman or girl, they can. I talked to an educator and a psychologist for some tips on good intergenerational conversation, because there's a little
Mm-hmm.
bit of a power imbalance there, right? If it's a mom talking to a girl and you expect her to be really frank and not get in
Right.
trouble. Um, there
Mm-hmm.
are also some cool paper dolls that I'm in love with, and
Oh, yeah, those
and
are
a
cute.
playlist created by a 17-year-old girl.
So I was going to kind of ask you about that. So do you recommend it? I'm wondering how you recommend people use this book and kind of digest this book. So is that kind of a just a good suggestion for it, or is it kind of a, read it as you like? There's so many wonderful affirmations in the book. You know what I mean? So read it when you need some empowerment. Like how do you want readers to use this book?
I would say, I tell you how I would read it as a reader.
Mm-hmm.
I would read it all the way through once and then
Mm-hmm.
return to letters that I need when I need them. That's why it
Mm-hmm.
was really important to me to have the index at the back. So once
Mm-hmm.
you've read it, you can kind of go back and cover themes that you might need.
Mm-hmm. For anybody that has not gotten a copy of the book, definitely get a copy of the book. I was happy to see so many different perspectives represented. You have letters about being multiracial. You have a letter addressing transracial adoption, which is really interesting. Of course, trans sisters. There's a letter about being queer and questioning.
Mhm.
So you were really able to get just a wide range of experiences, which I should hope would also just kind of educate anybody that's reading the book and is curious.
Mhm. I mean, it was an education to me. Well, we don't, even when we share a gender identity or, share a race,
Mm-hmm.
we do not share all of our experiences. We all have so many intersecting identities. I think it's useful for us to hear those stories from other women so that we
Mm-hmm.
can learn, even if we haven't experienced them.
So I'm going to ask you, and we'll get into a little bit more about your kind of like your journey to publishing. Like your first book came out in 2015. You talk in your second book about, even though I am an executive of a nonprofit, I still write. It's still important to do what you're passionate about. So tell us a little bit more about your background and how you got into, becoming an author.
So writing is always something that I love to do. Writing a book has been a lifelong dream. And I mean that. My mother reminded me at my first book launch, she's like, you used to sit in the corner talking to yourself and making books and magazines, or you just be going over there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was a journalism major and spent a couple years working on a copy desk before I moved to the dark side and became a PR person. And that's what I've done for most of my career.
Mm-hmm.
But without doing a lot of writing for myself. Because you're writing for work, and I'm writing press releases, and I'm writing this, and I kind of let go of my writing.
Mm-hmm.
And about maybe to a little more than a decade ago, I was going to say picked up a pen again. It was more like a computer,
Mm-hmm.
and started writing. First, I started writing for myself on a blog, which got some attention, and I started writing a little for other outlets online. And I
Mm-hmm.
just kept pitching. And once I started doing it again, I don't know how I went so long without writing for myself and not
Mm-hmm.
making space for writing in my life. Um, I actually, during that time, discovered when I was doing some genealogy research that
Mm-hmm.
one of my maternal grandmothers, I found she wrote poetry. And I have this huge stack of poetry that she wrote um,
Oh.
as the mother of 10 children in
Mm-hmm.
Talladega, Alabama in the early
Wow.
1900s. So,
That's gonna be your
you know,
third book.
that was like that was like a message to me that I'm gonna
Wow.
guess that her life was a lot harder than mine. And
Mhm.
if she could carve out some kind of time to write, then I can too.
That's so awesome because that's like, I always think about, as a writer, just kind of this legacy that I'm leaving, my children and my grandchildren. And so you're already seeing this, and being encouraged by this finding, so it's kind of like, I don't know. I kind of think about that when you think about all of these complex things that we talk about now, like how do we document our writing? What do we do with our writing once we're gone, right? How do we instruct our loved ones to care for it? So,
I had the supreme honor to have like a lunch at a Greek restaurant with
mm-hmm.
Tananarive Due. I don't know how many people know
Mm-hmm.
her. She's a science fiction, speculative fiction writer, and she
Mm-hmm.
gave this advice. She's like, just commit to writing one word a day. And I was like, huh, I've never heard anybody say that. And she's like,
Mm-hmm.
in reality, you're not going to write one word. If you take the time to sit down in front of
Mm-hmm.
your, chances are you're going to do more than that. But if all you write is
Mm-hmm.
then you met your commitment.
See, and I see her as just a very, very, and if anybody can type her name, because I know I'll destroy it. If anybody can type her name in the chat, because even on her Facebook page, I think sometimes she'll post little things about her process. So there you go. What is your writing process? Are you very like strategic when it comes to, and how does it differ when you know that, this is just something I'm writing and however it takes shape, it takes shape. And this is my book project.
So I like to accumulate, especially for these nonprofit, non-fiction projects. I like to
Mm-hmm.
do some of my research and interviews first because it helps me kind of, listening to women and listening to them talk kind of helps me shape where the narrative should go.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I do is I've carved out 3 mornings a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and I have two friends, and we get up and we meet on Zoom at 6 a.m. and we write for 2 hours on whatever we're working on. So I try to carve out that space, get up, light some incense, put on some nice
Mm-hmm.
music, and just write for 2 hours. I'm fresher in the morning, and
Mm-hmm.
if I rely on doing it after work, when I'm tired and when I've spent the day in Zooms or on meetings or whatever, I may not just have the creative capacity to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Probably a very bad habit of mine, which came along with the switch from, I'm old enough. So in high school, I remember writing papers out by hand and then typing
Mm-hmm.
them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which meant I actually wrote instead of editing while I'm writing, which is a bad habit of mine.
Mm-hmm.
I am horrible at free writing, and I tend to write and edit at the same time.
Yeah,
So
same
I
here.
can spend I can spend 2 hours on a paragraph.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like you always do you feel like you have always been aware of your voice, or that your writing voice, I should say, or that's something that you've been able to cultivate over the years and kind of refine?
I think it's developed over the years, and I think part of it came from the time I spent blogging.
Mm-hmm.
And it was nice because I spent a lot of time writing where no one was probably reading it. And it allowed me to kind of refine what felt like the way I talk.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think it's an evolution though too, because I'm probably influenced by other writers that I read. I think my writing has been influenced over time by just the fact that I spent 20 years doing PR and marketing, which has to be really concise. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm like the queen of the red pen. I'll like slash through writing. So I think my voice has evolved over time. I think it's probably more authentic than it's ever been
Mm-hmm.
as I get older.
Mm-hmm. You talked about really gravitating towards nonfiction. Is that something that you feel like is that like your path, or do you feel like there's inklings of, of I want to dabble in fiction? Because it seems like nowadays everybody is starting to do a little bit of everything.
Part of it is because I'm a chicken.
Mm-hmm.
And I gravitate towards the things I feel like I'm good at.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel comfortable writing nonfiction. I really do want to dabble in, like, I love a cozy mystery. Oh my gosh, I love a cozy mystery. I would love to write one, especially with a
Mm-hmm.
Black female protagonist, because that never happens. I don't know how I get a Black female protagonist somewhere where the vicar is going to kill someone with a candlestick, but I think I can do it. And I
Mm-hmm.
also am starting to really love poetry, and I'm really interested in maybe trying my hand at that. I
Mm-hmm.
earlier during the quarantine, I read the collected poems of Lucille Clifton, and she is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, she got me excited and inspired. So I figured now that I have turned in my second manuscript in the last few months, I'd
Mm-hmm.
love to take a poetry class this summer.
And that's the funny thing about it, because there are certain genres, like for me, and I know when I was younger, I was a child that always wrote as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I started with these poems, but over the years, I generally write nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
And now it seems so intimidating, to just like, can I just write? Maybe I will take a workshop, or maybe I will take it. Like, what I mean? There's so many people that do it and do it so well,
You know what the stress is? And I don't know whether anyone here feels this way. I feel like I know what's good when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to nonfiction. I'm not sure that I always know what's good when it comes to, I'm scared that I don't know what's good when it comes to poetry.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that someone would read it and go, oh my gosh, this is abysmal.
That's when you get a pen name. You get a pen name and you start
Right.
putting stuff out. Is there anything that surprised you about just your whole journey to publication? We always talk about how we know, the publishing industry is predominantly white. There are a lot of different barriers to not just publishing, but being able to write and live, right? Especially for people that are trying to make it a sustainable career. Um, so, in terms of, like I said, going from, okay, this is a concept and this is a book that I feel needs to be on shelves. It's very, very specific when you're going through this whole process of, oh, okay, I know I need to do a book proposal and da 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 da. But what did you find in the process of getting your first book published, that you found encouraging, and what did you find that you wish was different?
I was incredibly lucky to find Barrett Kohler Publishers because they are supportive, they get it. I wasn't even agented when I found them. I was actually
Mm-hmm.
sending queries out to agents. And an acquaintance of mine who had been published through Barrett Kohler said, I think my editor would like you. I'm just going to introduce the two of you. And I shared my idea and they loved it. And theirs is such a nurturing process. And I think they show a lot of respect for authors and bring you along on the process and give you a lot of choices, which I think is wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that way, I think I'm very, very lucky, having heard some other authors' experiences. The thing that has surprised me most from first book to second book is how the process of selling or marketing or promoting a book has changed in just 6 years,
Mm-hmm.
and how much less important traditional media is. Um, in fact, like a lot of I remember some of the coverage that was really important in selling my first book, which was a long read on Gawker. Gawker doesn't
Mm-hmm.
even exist. I mean,
Yeah.
there was a reprint in Salon, Salon, people don't
Mhm.
read Salon like they used to. A lot of,
Mhm.
local newspapers no longer have book editors, or they don't have features editors. And
Mhm.
so book publishing and promotion is all about bookstagrammers and, different non-traditional ways that are a lot more work intensive, for authors for less reach. That
Mhm.
said, the Bookstagram community is amazing. Like they're like the idea that there are all these book lovers out there who are
Mhm.
promoting books and talking about them just because they love reading and books
Right.
and writing as much as we do is very, very cool, but it's very different,
Mhm.
especially considering, like, for a lot of newer authors, I mean, a lot of smaller presses can't pay to do a lot of promotion. If you're not, Stephen
Right.
King, you're not going to get a lot of promotion. So
Mhm.
that's really interesting to me.
Did you have any concerns about, I mean, literally your second book is came out during the pandemic. So
Mhm.
there's just a lot of things that are just completely different. Did you find that and we're watching, of course, we had a full year last year.
Mhm.
You are good friends with the author Disha Filyov, which we had on a previous craft chat. And so just kind of being able to watch the way she moved in terms of promoting and just seeing all these new and unique ways that authors are promoting it. But on the flip side, that's such a scary thing. This is such a new thing.
Yeah, you can never beat the company of writers. Like I love being in this space with you guys. Everyone is so supportive and, you know, I've been able to like follow in her wake and, she'll say, "Oh, you want to call this bookstore because they're really great." And then I can follow behind and do those kind of things and
Mm-hmm.
check those things out. So that, that's been very helpful, looking at what other writers do and other writers being willing to offer advice and, share contacts. And I think that's more important than ever before.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like do you feel like we're doing this in a way that's new? Like I can just think back to even, you did a recent interview where you and Disha did an interview for, I think it was Bitch Magazine,
Mhm.
where you're kind of talking about that. And I'm seeing and I don't know if it's a shifting culture, but I'm seeing so much support from different members of the writing community where they're talking about, hey, they're promoting, you're not afraid to promote other people's work. Where I feel like more, it was a little bit more of like a crabs in the barrel, type of situation.
I don't know. I mean, all the writers that I've been around have always been very extremely generous. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
from my friend who was like, "Let me introduce you to my publisher." Like,
Yeah.
they've always been incredibly generous.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not generous, you don't get to be my writer friend.
Now I'm not saying, and I don't have a dog in that fight because I've had a lot of, of generous people around me as well. I had an intro to my agent, so definitely be a giver, not a taker. There's room for everyone. You talked about, and I don't know if it was in an interview, or a section of your new book, Black Girl, but you're talking about an upcoming project where you are interviewing girls. And then there's some aspects of it that make it seem like it might be, there might be some multimedia aspects to the project. Is that something that you can talk about?
Sure. So it's actually been an ongoing project since I finished Sisters, and a lot of it
Mm-hmm.
informed this book. I'm working with a friend of mine. We thought about like what would it look like to write a book on how we can radically raise Black girls to be all right now instead of having to grow into being all right when they're 40. Because so many women that I interviewed in the Sisters Are All Right were,
Mm-hmm.
I'm finally coming into my, like, now I'm 50, I finally realized that all those negative things that I've heard, and but why should we have to, like, why should that be? and what would it
Mhm.
look like if we raised Black girls with an acknowledgement of the misogynoir that they were going to deal with, and
Mhm.
so that they could be all right now. So in part of that process, we have been interviewing girls in groups, we've been hanging out with them, we've
Mhm.
taken them to dinner, hung out in places where like they think adults aren't listening, to start gathering information. And in fact, like the preface to Dear Black Girl, when I say, Dear Black Girl, you tell me things, some of those things that I
Mhm.
mentioned, Black girls tell me, were told to me by those girls.
Mhm. And how does that tie into because the your organization centering sisters,
Mhm.
you talked earlier about doing workshops. So how does this all tie in?
So actually, Centering Sisters is a group that I founded with Dr. Carolyn Strong and Dr. Tiffany Monfort Dent. And they're the two women that I actually was doing the intergenerational workshop with when the idea for Dear Black Girls was born. So it's a new organization that started right before the pandemic. So the thing we've done most over the last year is we had some healing circles for Black women, virtual ones, especially during the early days of quarantine. So women
Mhm.
could just check in and say, how are you doing? And talk very like frankly about how they were faring, and some of them weren't doing well.
Mhm.
Tiffany is a psychologist, Carolyn is an educator, and so we each brought our individual skills. I'm a registered yoga teacher, so we did meditation. We also
Mhm.
have video casts twice a month where we focus on a variety of issues. This week it was incarceration,
Mhm.
and do interviews, and we're looking to expand that over the year. But it's all centered on Black women and Black girls and healing.
Mhm. You did your yoga teaching certification pretty recently, right?
Mhm.
Okay. Was that inspired by the craziness of the pandemic?
I don't know
Just
what
like
inspired me to think I could do that.
uh-huh.
I'd always wanted to be a certified yoga teacher, and I had this great opportunity to get registered through this program called Communities Rising that focuses
Mm.
specifically on people of color and being able to
Mhm.
bring yoga and meditation and breath work into their communities. And it just so happened, we had one in-person session and then quarantined. So I did it all virtually throughout
Mhm.
last year, but it ended up being right on. The universe was right on time, because if ever
Mhm.
there was a year where, I needed to have time set aside for breathing and meditation and movement to try to keep myself sane, it was 2020.
Mhm. I'm doing my yoga teaching certification through my vinyasa practice. And so, I mean, this was something that I started at the end of last year. So if you see me post about it, don't be like this crazy stalker. But I really felt like it was something, and I kept hearing, and I've been doing yoga since I was 19 years old.
Mhm,
So it was something about just being forced into stillness,
mhm.
that I think everybody was like, what are the things that I always wanted to do? Because there
Yeah.
are so many things that we were so used to doing that we couldn't do. You know
Yes.
what I mean? And what are these other ways that we can kind of just keep it together, keep ourselves healthy, you know? So I saw that and I was like, okay. I got a question in the chat that is kind of general, but I do want to ask you what advice you would give to first time authors. And I don't know. And if you want to specify, Marie, if you're what point of the process you're in, but what advice do you give to brand new authors?
One, keep writing, and don't be daunted if it's taking you forever, because it took me 3 years just to write my first book proposal, with fits and starts and tearing it up and doing it over again.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say make sure you're learning about the industry and the actual process. I talk to so many people who say, "Oh, I want to write a book. I want to write a fiction book. I want to write a nonfiction book," but they don't know anything about they're setting out on the path without a roadmap. And I actually took 2 or 3 classes just on book proposals before I ever finished mine. Um, and
Wow.
so I think it's useful to know as much as you can before you embark on that path.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that's just a like a factor of your personality? Because I feel like I'm the same.
It kind of
Like
is.
if I wanted to, before I got into opinion writing, I did a seminar on like I attended a seminar on opinion writing. I'm
Yeah,
like, I need some
like 2
training.
conferences, read 3 books, and then I'll get started.
But what I want to know is once you've kind of gone through this process, does it then, are in what I would wonder if, okay, I've gotten this book, right? It's done well. Um, is it more intimidating? Or are you more encouraged to say, okay, like this is what's my next project? Let's embark on that.
Well, now I know I can do it.
Mm-hmm.
So now it doesn't seem as daunting. So definitely now I feel like I can say, okay, what's my next book project?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
I think there was, I mean, and I always say that writers will always have this, kind of like this cloud of imposter syndrome and these neurosis. But I had to learn to kind of think about it and be like, I'm going to be writing for the rest of my life. Like I literally will be writing since I was a kid. Right. So once you kind of think of it, and then I read this quote, I think it was in Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, but she was saying, you really like once you commit and realize that this is the long game, this is a lifelong journey, all of that stuff, like you can kind of shed some of that stuff and be like, all right, if I take three years to get my next book out, I'm still going to be alive in 3 years. Like, I'll still be able to, right? Like, so did you initially when you started your first book, was this like, okay, well, this is just like this is my path now, and this is something that I'm always going to be doing, as you stated in your book Dear Girls, where you're saying, you can just find what you're passionate about and not feel like you have to fit into this box.
I hope so. I hope
Mm-hmm.
I get to do this for the rest of my life. That would
Mm-hmm.
be awesome. I know, it's a privilege to be able to spend time doing something that you love so much and actually get to put something out in the world and have
Mm-hmm.
people read it. So I hope I get to continue to do that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to encourage everybody, and I think, and we kind of talked earlier, I feel like, as you stated before, I want to encourage everybody to pick up a copy of the book. I was reading the book thinking, how can I like apply this? Because I have 2 boys, so I have two older boys. So I'm like, how can can I read some of these out loud to them? Because it's so much good. You're talking about things that are applicable to to more than just girls. But definitely pick up a copy of the book. And I feel like this is even one of these books where you can kind of, there's certain books where you give as gifts, right? As like graduation gifts and things like that. You know what I mean? So I thought, I was like, this is a perfect book for that, you know. So if you haven't picked up a copy, definitely put it. There are links, and yeah, there's links to the book in the chat. But I just want to thank you,
I think
Tamara.
I just wanted to answer Samantha's question.
Oh, is
Samantha
there another question in the chat?
questions.
Yeah.
Samantha asked about my marketing background and whether it was helpful. It was
Yes.
very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
As I mentioned, that depending on your publisher, they may or may not give you a lot of marketing help. I mean, Barrett Kohler is generous, but there's still a limit to what they can do, especially with a new author. Many authors that I've talked to hire people to help promote. but the fact that I knew how to do PR and marketing allowed me to save some of that money and actually do some things myself. So I think it is a good idea to think about what of the marketing and promotion process you think you can do, like what you can own, because it's understandable that you can't own everything, especially if you also have a job, but figure out what you can own and get good and get smart at it. And the poet I said I was reading is Lucille Clifton.
Yeah, so I don't want to, if anybody else had, I don't want to overlook anybody's questions in the chat. And Amy, so if you see anything that I don't catch before we close out, let me know. The only other questions that I saw was, what was the name of the poet that you recently read? And that was Lucille Clifton. That was the one that she was, referring to. Okay, wonderful. Well, again, I want to thank you for joining us. That's our time. But and just really, I want to thank you for putting this out into the world. And honestly, I look forward to the next project where we're kind of getting, some of these girls' perspectives. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
You all have a wonderful weekend and keep writing.
Thanks, you guys. Good night.